Welcome to Pennsylvania in Focus. I'm Eliana Kernodle, Assistant General Manager for America's Talking Network. Joining me today is Anthony Hennon, the Center Square's Pennsylvania reporter. Anthony, fentanyl-connected overdose deaths have been rising pretty rapidly in recent years, and it's been in the news a lot, but that's not the only area where we've seen fentanyl contributing to fatalities. Some pretty significant numbers on fatal car crashes came out. Can you lay those out for us?
Yeah. So, Pennsylvania in recent years, we've seen, multiple years where more than 5,000 people have died from an overdose. And so that's been bad enough. That's, I believe, about second nationwide, which is already wild compared to a decade ago. I mean, this is really developed from a small scale problem to a really, really big one. But now we're also seeing this on the roads and on driving. So one study from Jerry, which is a car insurance app, was looking at some data from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and showed that 6% of Philadelphia's fatal crashes involved drugs from 2018 to 2021. 2% of all traffic fatalities were connected to fentanyl, which is pretty high when you drill down into this because 32% of all drug-related fatalities were connected to fentanyl, which if you just by looking at if we did not have such a big problem here with fentanyl, with illicit opioids, the roads would be dramatically safer. And when we're looking at Pennsylvania, 21% of fatal crashes in Bucks County involve drugs, 15% in Delaware and Chester counties involve drugs, and 12% of fatal crashes in Lancaster County involve drugs. So this is becoming a bigger and bigger problem. This generally follows population trends. Philadelphia and Pittsburgh's metro areas have the highest concentration of these drug-related traffic fatalities. But it's definitely something where we've seen, as on the streets, people have been dying of overdose deaths. This is also leaking out into, people just driving home or, driving around town, getting taken out by someone who is, high on fentanyl.
And it's not just fatal car crashes too, though, right? We see these numbers in other kinds of collisions, right?
Yeah. We don't exactly have a clean data point on how many non-fatal traffic collisions are connected to drugs or fentanyl. But you can find a number of examples. In June 2022, of course, there's a woman in a Montgomery County collision who was on fentanyl and killed a 77-year-old woman. But you can look back to 2019, a woman in Lancaster County was sentenced up to a decade in prison for a collision that injured a woman and her 11-year-old daughter, who both thankfully survived, but that's still a fentanyl-related crash. And last July in Allegheny County, a one-car crash was caused by a man on a handful of drugs, and his 5-year-old son was in the back seat. So, even if we're expanding the look just from fatal fentanyl-related crashes, non-fatal crashes are also, unfortunately, more and more common.
And fentanyl has been impacting a variety of other areas in the state as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think, obviously settlement money coming from from various, 5 or 6 opioid related cases with places like CVS, Walgreens, Walmart, not to mention pharmaceutical companies. That's bringing a lot of money into Pennsylvania, into every state, really. But Pennsylvania is getting somewhere north of $1 billion to spend over the next 18 years. So we're seeing this money go toward things, fairly, clearly drug-connected things like expanding recovery programs and services to help people leaving hospital or leaving prison basically get back on their feet and, live a sober life. We're seeing money go to, county jails to develop medication-assisted treatment programs for people addicted to opioids and other drugs. But we're also seeing this hit statewide legislation. I mean, you look in the Pennsylvania General Assembly, there's probably north of a dozen legislators who either had a family member or friend die from an overdose or are former addicts. Representative Jim Gregory has been very public about his past struggle with drugs, and now he's become an advocate for a number of developing recovery programs in the state. Representative Jim Struzzi had a family member who died from an overdose, and he's been a leading voice to push for legalizing fentanyl test strips, which happened last session. or now he's the lone Republican voice in a committee to legalize syringe exchange programs. So we're seeing more and more legislators who have been personally affected by the overdose crisis or opioid crisis and overdose deaths. And that's really affecting what bills, what laws are eventually coming to fruition in Pennsylvania. I think that's actually kind of overlooked, where we see a lot of different states pushing various programs or various reforms. But in Pennsylvania, it seems more and more it's been personal for legislators, and that's really shaping what becomes law or what programs get funding boosts.
Well, that's all the time we have today. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com. For Anthony Hennin, I'm Eliana Kernodle. Please subscribe, and thank you for listening. Audible is a great way to gain access to an ever-growing selection of audiobooks. They've got what everyone's listening to: bestsellers, new releases, that story you've been waiting for. Follow the link in our show description to get 30 days of Audible free.